Welcome to the Deep Dive. So if you ever get into political discussions, maybe about military spending or drug laws, monetary policy, heck, even just local school board stuff, right? You probably notice something kind of strange. It feels like the same groups, the same, political tribes, they always seem to line up on opposite sides, even on issues that don't seem directly connected at all.
Yeah, it's remarkably consistent, isn't it? It happens way too often to just be like coincidence or maybe temporary political maneuvering.
Or just different facts.
Or just different facts, exactly. And this is the big puzzle that Thomas Sowell tackles in his really important book, A Conflict of Visions. His whole argument is that the deep split in our political life, the reason these groups are so consistent across such different topics, isn't really about the data.
Okay, so if it's not the facts driving it, what is it then?
Well, Sowell argues it's about these fundamental, often kind of hidden moral and philosophical visions. Visions about human nature itself and about how society actually works, cause and effect.
Visions, like worldviews, deep assumptions.
Exactly. So Val calls them the silent shapers of our thoughts. They're the assumptions we carry around, maybe without even realizing it, about what people are capable of, where evil comes from, what's even possible for us to achieve as a society. And those assumptions, well, they drive everything else.
Wow. So the real fight isn't over what policy is best, but over these completely different pictures of reality.
That's the core idea. And that's what this deep dive is all about today. Understanding these two huge competing frameworks. Sowell gives them names, the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. And we're going to explore how holding one vision or the other leads to totally opposed ideas about really basic things like justice, freedom, even power itself. It really boils down to this ongoing struggle between, you could say, the dream of perfection and the wisdom of restraint. It's shaped so much of our history.
All right, so to really get into this, we have to start where Sowell starts, right? At the absolute foundation, what is human nature? He argues every consistent political or moral outlook kind of stems from a picture of what humans are like. Let's start with the unconstrained vision. This is the one often linked to, well, utopian thinking.
Yeah, the unconstrained vision, sometimes called the utopian view, its defining idea, its core premise, is that human nature isn't fixed. It's malleable, it's improvable, maybe even capable of something near perfection, or at least continuous, unlimited improvement.
So problems like injustice or suffering, they aren't just part of the human condition.
Not inherently, according to this vision. They hang around because our social institutions are flawed, or maybe because we're just ignorant, we haven't applied enough reason yet. Fundamentally, humans can be made much, much better.
And Sowell points to a key historical figure for this view.
The classic example he uses is William Godwin. He wrote this book, Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, back in the late 1700s. Godwin had this immense faith in human perfectibility.
Perfectibility, does that mean he thought people were perfect?
Oh, no, not that they were perfect then, but that they were perfectible, meaning there were no known limits to how much better humans could become. He thought man hereafter may be made better, basically through applying reason and getting rid of corrupting influences from society.
Okay, so if people are fundamentally good, or at least improvable like that, what does that mean for why people do good things? For virtue? Does it mean we can act purely altruistically?
That's a crucial implication. Godwin absolutely believed that the intention to help others is, in his words, of the essence of virtue. He imagined people could, through reason, become truly impartial.
Impartial even against their own self-interest.
Yeah, like capable of seeing a stranger's need as genuinely more important than their own desires or even their family's needs, if pure reason led them to that conclusion. The moral person acts out of this high sense of duty, dictated by reason.
And if people can be motivated purely by reason and duty, then maybe things like rewards or punishments, external motivators, they become kind of unnecessary, maybe even harmful.
That's exactly where it leads. The unconstrained vision tends to look down on socially engineered incentives, things like bonuses, competition, even, the threat of legal punishment. They're seen as distractions.
Distractions from what?
From cultivating that higher rational sense of social duty. They're seen as potentially inimical to the improvement of the mind because they just focus people on their own selfish interests. Condorcet, another thinker in this vein, he disliked the idea of trying to turn prejudices and vices to good account. The goal should be to get rid of them, not work around them. The aim is direct social good, achieved through good intentions.
Okay, that's a clear picture. Now, let's flip to the other side, the constrained vision. If the first one starts with perfectibility, this one, it must start somewhere quite different. The tragic view, you called it.
Right, the constrained vision or the tragic view. It begins from the opposite premise that man is inherently and sort of tragically limited.
Limited how?
Limited in knowledge, we just can't know everything. Limited in virtue, we're inherently selfish to a degree. Limited in compassion, we care more about ourselves and those close to us. Evil, in this view, isn't just located in bad institutions you can fix. It's part of human nature itself. It's a constraint you have to live with.
And the big names here, writing around the same time as Godwin, were Adam Smith and Edmund Burke. Gives you that direct contrast.
Exactly. Smith and Burke are central figures. And for them, the challenge isn't to change human nature. They see that as pretty much impossible, or at least dangerous to try. The challenge is to create artificial devices.
Artificial devices, like what?
Things like moral principles, laws, market systems, traditions. Things that acknowledge man's inherent self-interest as egoism, but try to channel it, to harness it, so it produces broader social benefits, even if unintentionally. It's all about managing constraints and accepting trade-offs.
Okay, let's focus on that egoism constraint. So Sowell often brings up Adam Smith's China analogy as like the ultimate expression of this tragic limitation of empathy. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it's a really stark thought experiment from Smith's theory of moral sentiments. He asks you to imagine a European man hearing that the entire empire of China, millions of people he's never met, will be wiped out by an earthquake tomorrow.
Okay.
Smith says the man would express sorrow. Maybe think about it philosophically for a bit. But ultimately, he'd snore with the most profound security over the ruin. However, if that same man knew he was going to lose just his own little finger the next day, he wouldn't sleep a wink.
Wow. That's pretty bleak about human nature. The implication is that deep down, we're incredibly self-centered.
That's the core insight. Smith isn't saying this is good. He's saying it's a fixed psychological reality. It's a constraint we have to build our society around. We can't rely on universal benevolence. So the moral and practical challenge becomes, how do you get good societal outcomes despite this fundamental localized empathy?
It almost sounds like they view morality itself less as this pure ideal thing and more like an engineering problem, how to build a system that works with flawed materials.
That's a really good way to think about it. Smith definitely approached creating moral behavior systematically, a bit like how he thought about wealth creation in The Wealth of Nations. It emerges from a system managing incentives and trade-offs. Because they accept what Burke called a radical infirmity in all human contrivances, this vision inherently rejects chasing perfect solutions.
Why reject solutions?
Because they see the pursuit of the ideal, the utopian perfection, as often the enemy of the good. Trying to achieve perfection ignores the necessary messy trade-offs involved in reality. And those grand attempts often end up destroying the very systems and traditions that, while imperfect, actually produce a decent amount of good for society.
So let me see if I've got this. The unconstrained view sees a problem in the system that smart people can fix with a better design. But the constrained view sees a fundamental flaw in the people, the human component, that can't be fixed, only managed and constrained by the system itself.
You've got it. That's the fundamental divide, and it shapes everything else. The nature of knowledge and rationality. And that deep disagreement about human nature directly leads to completely different ideas about knowledge. Where does it come from? Who has it? How reliable is it?
Right. If you think humans are deeply flawed and limited, you probably won't trust any single person's brilliant plan too much.
Exactly. Whereas if you believe in human perfectibility through reason, then articulated reason becomes paramount.
Okay, let's stick with the constrained view first. If wisdom doesn't reside primarily in the brilliant mind of the philosopher or the expert, where does it live?
In the constrained tradition, knowledge isn't seen as something one person can hold. It's viewed as vast, incredibly fragmented, and widely dispersed throughout society and across time. Any single individual's conscious, articulated knowledge is, frankly, grossly inadequate to grasp the whole picture.
So it's not about book learning necessarily.
Not primarily. Knowledge, in this view, is predominantly experience, and it gets transmitted socially, often in ways we can't fully explain or articulate. Think about prices in a market. They convey vast amounts of information about scarcity and demand without anyone centrally planning it, or customs, traditions, moral habits.
Burke's idea of the general bank and capital of nations and of ages.
Precisely. That's the collective wisdom. It's embodied in the system itself, in these evolved processes. It's the result of countless small-scale trials and errors over generations, where practices that worked tended to survive and those that didn't, well, they died out.
This sounds like a built-in argument against radical change led by intellectuals. It suggests the existing system, warts and all, might contain more wisdom than the reformer trying to tear it down.
It definitely leads to a deep skepticism of intellectual elites who claim to have the answer. The real wisdom isn't in the articulated rationality of the few, but in these evolved systemic processes. Alexander Hamilton showed this practical skepticism in the Federalist Papers. He basically dismissed the idea that any political actor could act purely for the public good, completely unbiased by considerations not connected to their own interests or limited perspective.
Nobody's that purely rational or objective?
Right. And if you believe that, and you believe wisdom is embedded in tradition, then you approach change very differently.
You tread carefully.
Very carefully. Reform should be cautious, incremental, respecting the confirmed habits and prejudices of the people, as Burke put it, because those habits might represent distilled, practical wisdom, even if we can't fully articulate why they work. Burke even suggested we should attend to society's flaws with the same caution and reverence as tending the wounds of our Father. You're fixing something precious that has endured, not wiping the slate clean.
Okay, the contrast must be stark then. Compare that deep-seated humility, that reverence for tradition, to how the unconstrained vision sees knowledge.
It's almost the polar opposite. For the unconstrained vision, knowledge is seen as highly concentrated, specifically in the cultivated mind. Because they believe human nature can be perfected through reason, the accumulated experience of the past isn't necessarily valuable.
It could even be a barrier.
Often seen that way, yeah. Past experience might just be the illusions of the ignorant or accumulated superstition and prejudice that needs to be swept away.
Mm-hmm.
Reason, especially reason that can be clearly articulated and defended logically, is supreme.
So tradition needs to justify itself to the current generation's reason.
Exactly. Godwin argued everything must be brought to the standard of reason. Condorcet went further, suggesting that everything that bears the imprint of time must inspire distrust more than respect. If a tradition or institution can't be logically defended right now by today's best minds, it's probably holding us back.
Well, that naturally creates a hierarchy, doesn't it?
Right.
Between those with the cultivated minds and everyone else.
It absolutely implies a profound intellectual inequality. You have the reasoned, enlightened views of the intellectual pioneers, and then you have the narrow views, the prejudices, the habits of the masses who are maybe stuck in superstition or acting out of self-interest.
And the role of the elite, then, is to lead.
Yes, to be guides and instructors, as Godwin put it. They are the precursors to their fellows in the discovery of truth. Their superior reason and moral insight make them the natural candidates to design and implement a better society for everyone else.
So it's not just that they know more facts, it's that they possess a superior kind of rationality, a moral clarity that justifies them taking the lead.
Precisely. It's the difference between valuing systemic rationality, the wisdom embedded in processes and traditions that no one person designed, versus valuing articulated rationality, the conscious, logical reasoning of an individual or a group of experts.
And you can really see this clash playing out in something as fundamental as the law.
Oh, absolutely. It's a perfect illustration. Take the constrained tradition. Just as Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. summed it up famously, the life of the law has not been logic. It has been experience.
Meaning law evolves slowly based on what actually works in society over time.
Right. It sums up the tested experience of countless people. This view naturally leads to judicial restraint. The judge's role isn't to impose their own moral vision, but to interpret the law based on precedent and the text, defining the boundaries within which people operate. They avoid making new law or constructions, not necessarily arising from the words of the Constitution. They're guardians of an evolved system.
But the unconstrained division must see that as passive, maybe even an abdication of moral responsibility.
Exactly. They see it as failing to use the power of reason to correct injustices embedded in that history. Thinkers like Ronald Dworkin or Lawrence Tribe argue judges must deliberately create or actively interpret law. They explicitly reject neutrality.
They want judges to be moral agents.
Yes, they call for a fusion of constitutional law and moral theory. The judge should apply fresh moral insight to achieve substantively just results, Dworkin actually dismissed the constrained, experience-based view as relying on the chaotic and unprincipled development of history, and called it a pessimistic theory of human nature.
So one side sees respecting precedent and process as upholding hard-won wisdom. The other sees actively using judicial power to achieve perceived justice as applying superior moral reason. They're talking past each other.
Completely past each other, using the same legal language, but with fundamentally different goals and assumptions. The battle over process versus results. And this fundamental clash over process versus results, systemic wisdom versus articulated reason, it plays out dramatically in how societies are designed politically. The two great revolutions of the late 18th century, the American and the French, are like perfect case studies.
Okay, the U.S. Constitution, that feels like the ultimate expression of the constrained vision, right? It seems built on, well, not trusting anyone too much.
That mistrust is absolutely central. The American founders, heavily influenced by thinkers like Smith, Montesquieu, and the lessons of history, saw government itself as, in the words of the Federalist Papers, the greatest of all reflections on human nature. Because humans aren't angels, you need government. But because those governing are also human, you need to control the government.
Hence, checks and balances.
All those checks and balances. Federalism, the Senate and the House, separation of powers, the Bill of Rights. It was all designed with the explicit assumption that no one was ever to be completely trusted with power. The goal wasn't to find the perfect leaders and let them rule. It was to create a system that forced trade-offs among competing self-interested factions. It was designed to make it hard for any single group, even a supposedly enlightened one, to seize total control.
So they focused on the process, the machinery of government, to manage those inevitable human flaws.
Exactly. Harnessing self-interest, dispersing power, relying on procedure. That was the goal.
But the French Revolution, coming out of that Enlightenment optimism, reflected the unconstrained vision, didn't it? A belief that enlightened people could design a perfect system.
Very much so. It aimed for a solution. It rejected complexity and counterweights. Condorcet, deeply involved in the early resolution, actually criticized constitutional checks like the American ones for creating an overcomplicated political machine.
Why see checks as complicated?
Well, if you fundamentally trust human reason and believe in the good intentions of enlightened leaders, then checks and balances just look like unnecessary friction. They get in the way of the smart, benevolent elite implementing the obviously correct, rational plan for society. The ultimate goal, as people like Robespierre articulated it, was a kind of perfection, when all people will have become equally devoted to their country and its laws.
And this unwavering faith in achieving the perfect outcome, Sowell argues it can lead the unconstrained vision to justify almost any cost along the way.
This is one of the most chilling parts of the analysis. He uses Thomas Jefferson as an example. Jefferson, initially a huge supporter of the French Revolution, even as the violence escalated, Jefferson wrote that rather than it should have failed, I would have seen half the earth desolated.
Half the earth desolated, just to ensure the revolutionary ideas succeeded. That's hard to comprehend.
It's shocking, isn't it? But it perfectly illustrates how, for the unconstrained vision, the perceived value of the final ideal outcome can dwarf the costs of the process, even horrific costs like mass violence or the destruction of existing institutions. Those costs are seen as temporary, regrettable, but ultimately necessary sacrifices for achieving a state of perfect justice and human potential that will last forever.
You can see echoes of this same basic split when we look at how the two visions approach big social problems like war and crime. How does the unconstrained vision explain where evil like that comes from?
The unconstrained approach tends to localize the evil. It assumes it has specific, identifiable, and therefore fixable causes. War, for instance, isn't seen as just an inherent part of the human condition. It's the result of specific things like misunderstandings between nations, or maybe undemocratic governments where, as Godwin said, the many are the instruments of the few. Fix the cause, you eliminate war.
And crime is similar, always a symptom of something else.
Yes, exactly. Crime isn't seen as stemming from an individual's inherent flaws or choices alone. It's attributed to external special causes. Poverty, lack of education, mental illness, an oppressive or unjust society that failed the individual. The criminal, therefore, isn't fundamentally evil, but rather a miserable victim of circumstances.
Which logically leads to a focus on rehabilitation, not punishment.
Right. The solution is to fix the underlying social cause and to rehabilitate the individual. Punishment is often viewed skeptically, perhaps as primitive vengeance or a brutalizing throwback. The focus should be on therapy, education, social programs. Godwin genuinely believed that if you treated a criminal with reason and addressed the root causes, his reformation would be almost infallible.
So they look for specific, solvable causes for bad things, because the underlying assumption is that a perfect, harmonious state is achievable if we just fix those external problems.
Precisely. Now contrast that with the constrained view. For them, evil like war and crime, well, it doesn't really need a special explanation. It's baked into human nature, into our inherent limitations. What actually needs explaining is the existence of peace, prosperity, and law-abiding societies.
Those are the fragile achievements, not the default state.
Exactly. War happens because of, as the Federalist Papers put it, precisely the same inducements which have deluged in blood all the nations of the world. It's driven by the inherent ambition, fear, and self-interest of human groups. So peace isn't achieved by eliminating the causes of war because those causes are permanent, but by deterrence, by military strength, by reliable alliances, by robust systems that constrain conflict.
And their view on crime and punishment must be radically different, too. It's not about fixing the criminal, but protecting society.
It's primarily about social protection and maintaining order. It's seen as a necessary trade-off. Adam Smith viewed punishment not as vengeance, but as a crucial part of the social system needed to maintain trust and deter wrongdoing. His famous line captures it: "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent."
So the constrained vision accepts the unpleasantness, the costs of a strong justice system because they don't believe in a perfect solution. They see it as managing an inherent problem using necessary, if imperfect, tools like punishment and moral training.
That's right. It's about maintaining the artificial devices that preserve order, even if those devices have costs.
Okay, here's where it gets really pointed. Sowell issues a kind of warning, doesn't he? If the unconstrained vision is so utterly convinced of its own moral clarity and the perfection of its plan, what happens when reality or other people push back, when they encounter resistant frictions?
This is where Sowell sees a serious danger of coercion emerging. That deep faith in human perfectibility, combined with the belief that the best and the wisest, a phrase from John Stuart Mill that Sowell uses, know the right path, well, it can lead logically to justifying force against those who resist.
How so?
Because if you know you have the key to a vastly better future for everyone, and some people, perhaps due to ignorance, prejudice, or selfish interest, stand in the way, they aren't just disagreeing. They're actively harming humanity's progress. They're preventing the arrival of utopia.
So even if someone like Godwin personally opposed using force, the logic of his vision could lead others down that path.
Sowell argues it does. When the beautiful rational plan meets the messy, stubborn resistance of reality, the temptation grows to see force and falsehood as not merely rights, but duties. Why? Because the promised benefits of the plan, the enormous benefits of an irreversible breakthrough, are seen as so immense, lasting for centuries, that they justify overriding dissent in the short term.
This really comes down to where you place the power to make decisions, doesn't it? The locus of discretion, as Sowell calls it.
Exactly. The unconstrained vision logically favors concentrating discretion. You put the power in the hands of surrogate decision makers, the experts, the enlightened elites, the planners, because they have the reason and the moral clarity to engineer the collective optimum, the just result.
Whereas the constrained vision wants power spread out,
widely dispersed among individuals and institutions. It relies on people making their own choices within a framework of general rules. Those rules define the boundaries of freedom, but they don't dictate the specific outcomes. Why? Because the constrained thinker fundamentally believes no single person, no committee, no expert panel has enough knowledge, wisdom, or virtue to plan the whole complex system without messing it up, probably catastrophically. Conflicting definitions of justice and equality.
So all these deep differences we've been tracing about human nature, about knowledge, about reason and process, they all inevitably collide when we get to defining the really big concepts that societies are built on, like justice.
Absolutely. The definitions of justice are almost mirror images of each other. For the constrained vision, justice isn't some abstract ideal you impose. It's instrumental. It's a necessary tool to keep society functioning. And crucially, it's defined as a process characteristic, meaning justice lies in adhering to the agreed-upon rules and boundaries impartially applied to everyone. Thomas Hobbes put it bluntly, "He that fulfilleth the law is just."
So the process is the point. If the rules are fair and followed, the outcome is just, even if it's unequal.
Generally, yes. The integrity of the process, the rule of law, is seen as the essential thing that allows for freedom and prosperity. Justice resides in the fairness of the system's operation, not in evaluating the end results for every single person.
Okay, but the unconstrained vision must find that definition completely inadequate. They focus on the result, right? This is where social justice comes in.
Precisely. For the unconstrained thinker, like Godwin, justice isn't about following rules. It's a result flowing from the contemplation of each individual case. Justice is seen as categorically paramount. If the outcome produced by an impersonal system like free market competition seems unfair or unequal, then the system itself must be morally flawed and needs to be overridden or redesigned to produce a better, more just outcome. The goal is a just world achieved through direct, intentional moral action.
This really helps explain that famous critique by F.A. Hayek, which Sowell discusses. Hayek called the pursuit of social justice a dangerous mirage. Why did he see it that way? It sounds like a good goal.
Hayek's argument, coming squarely from the constrained tradition, is this. Processes like the market, or the evolution of language, or common law, these are spontaneous orders. They produce overall patterns, but the specific results for individuals are unintended consequences emerging from millions of separate actions. There's no person or entity designing the final distribution.
Okay.
So to demand justice in the sense of a fair or deserved outcome from an impersonal process that has no intention, Hayek argued that's like demanding justice from the weather. It's applying a concept of moral desert to something that isn't capable of having intentions. It's conceptually confused, a mirage, or even nonsense.
And what's the practical danger Hayek saw in pursuing that mirage?
The danger is that if you do insist on achieving specific, predetermined, just outcomes, like a certain income distribution, you logically have to abandon the spontaneous, decentralized process. You must replace it with a centralized authority, a planner, who has the discretionary power to allocate resources and command people to achieve those specific results.
So, pursuing outcome justice leads directly to concentrated power and the end of the rule of law.
That was Hayek's core warning, and it flows directly from the constrained vision's premises. It destroys the very processes that generate overall prosperity and individual freedom. The constrained view accepts the tragic reality that in a free society based on process, some unworthy will succeed and some worthy fail, but sees that as the unavoidable price for the vastly greater benefits of freedom and decentralized coordination.
All right, let's apply this process versus results logic to equality. How does that play out?
It maps perfectly. The constrained vision champions equality of process. Everyone plays by the same rules. All individuals are subject to the same laws, same standards, regardless of who they are, where they came from, or what the final outcome is.
Like Adam Smith. He apparently thought philosophers and street porters were pretty similar at birth, but he still prioritized freedom over equal outcomes.
Exactly. Smith believed the differences were mostly due to upbringing and opportunity, suggesting an innate equality. But for him, the paramount goal for society was maintaining the process of liberty under law, not engineering equal results. Equality meant equality before the law.
But the unconstrained vision sees that equality before the law as potentially masking deep inequalities, maybe even a sham.
Often, yes. Formal equality is seen as insufficient, maybe even cruel, if people start from vastly different places. The unconstrained vision demands equality of results, or at least equality of prospects or material conditions. Condorcet argued society must actively intervene with policies to mitigate even the natural differences between men. Just applying the same rules isn't enough if those rules perpetuate unfair advantages.
And that's where ideas like affirmative action or compensatory advantages come from.
Precisely. If historical injustice or differences in circumstance create unequal starting lines, the system has a moral obligation to intervene, to provide boosts or advantages to disadvantaged groups, to try and ensure something closer to equality of actual outcome, not just formal opportunity. Some thinkers in this tradition even see wealth disparities as a kind of theft. The poor are co-heirs to society's wealth, and if they don't get their fair share, they've effectively been robbed.
And this drive for outcome equality can even justify overriding what people say they want?
It can, because the sense of moral certainty is so strong. Sowell quotes Durkheim, asserting that a more equal society is a better society, even if its citizens prefer inequality. That really captures the conviction. The enlightened view of what constitutes justice and equality takes precedence over popular preference or existing rules. It justifies imposing the better outcome.
Okay, last piece of the puzzle, freedom. It seems obvious now that they'll define this differently too. Constrained vision. Freedom is about the process. Negative liberty.
Yes, freedom is defined negatively as the absence of external human-imposed coercion or impediment. Hobbes' example. Water isn't unfree because of the riverbanks, a natural constraint, only if someone builds a dam, coercion. So freedom is maximized by limiting the power of government or other people to arbitrarily interfere with your choices. Hayek emphasized it's freedom from coercion, freedom from arbitrary power, but not freedom from circumstances or necessity.
So you're free if no one is stopping you, even if you lack the means to do what you want.
According to the constrained definition, yes. Now contrast that with the unconstrained vision. For them, freedom isn't just absence of coercion, it's positive freedom. Meaning freedom is defined as a result, it's the effective power to do specific things. True freedom requires not only the absence of external barriers, but also the presence of the necessary means and opportunities. If you're technically free from interference, but you lack the money, education, or health to actually pursue your goals, then you aren't truly free in this view.
And that has huge implications for what government should do.
Massive. It implies that social policy isn't a threat to freedom, but essential for freedom. The government have a positive duty to actively intervene to provide the economic resources, the education, the healthcare, whatever is deemed necessary to maximize people's effective scope of choice. From this perspective, government action isn't limiting freedom, it's creating it, enabling it.
Wow. So as Sowell points out, they end up using the exact same powerful words, justice, equality, freedom, but meaning fundamentally different, often completely opposite things.
And that's why the arguments often seem intractable. They're arguing from different planets, philosophically speaking. Yeah, so Sowell's whole analysis really forces you to look beneath the surface of day-to-day political arguments. Whether people are debating judicial appointments or healthcare policy, it's often not just about the specifics. It's rooted in this much deeper, ongoing moral clash between these two fundamental visions of humanity and the world.
The tragic view versus the utopian view.
Right. One emphasizing systemic wisdom, restraint, trade-offs, decentralized processes. The other emphasizing moral design, human potential, articulated reason, and often centralized solutions. The core disagreement really comes down to causation, what actually causes good outcomes and bad outcomes in society, and therefore, what can we realistically hope to achieve through deliberate action?
And it's important, as Sowell stresses, not to just slap these labels onto current political parties, right? These visions can be mixed, complex.
Absolutely. He gives the example of Marxism. In its analysis of history, it had a very constrained view, seeing inevitable systemic economic laws driving everything. But its vision for the communist future was purely unconstrained, promising the perfection of man, the end of all conflict and inequality.
So understanding the framework helps you dissect the underlying assumptions of almost any ideology, not just label it.
Exactly. And it reveals this fascinating paradox. The constrained vision, born from a deep sense of human limits and humility, relies on these messy, undesigned, spontaneous orders, markets, traditions, common law to create the complex civilization we have. Yet the unconstrained vision often looks at that very civilization, finds it wanting, and believes it must be redesigned, often by dismantling those very spontaneous processes.
Which leads us right back to that provocative final thought Sowell leaves us with. It's something for you, the listener, to really grapple with in your own thinking.
Yeah, think about it. The constrained vision deeply fears concentrated power, precisely because it believes humans are inherently flawed. The unconstrained vision, believing in perfectibility, trusts concentrated power in the hands of the best and wisest to achieve that perfection.
So what happens to a society when those who are most convinced of their own superior reason and morality, the champions of the unconstrained vision, decide they must override or dismantle the constrained processes, the checks and balances, the evolved traditions, in order to impose their vision of outcome justice?
How does that very pursuit of a perfect result inevitably lead to the concentration of the exact kind of power that the constrained vision warns is the greatest threat to freedom itself?
Sowell really challenges you to look beyond the policy debates, beyond the left-right labels, and ask, which of these fundamental visions, or what mix of them, truly underlies your own deepest beliefs about how the world works and how it should work? Because it's in that ongoing fundamental conflict between the dream of perfection and the wisdom of restraint that so much of our social and political reality is shaped.
Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to the deep dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shaped liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
See you next time.